Good evening all, I am Shilpa, Research Associate at CPPR, and I welcome you all to the panel discussion on Demystifying Higher Education Internationalization in India, organized by Center for Public Policy Research in partnership with the Association for Public Policy Education. So let me begin with a few words on APPE and CPPR. So Association for Public Policy Education is meant for promoting public policy education in India. The association aims for the development of the public policy discipline and practice by encouraging collaboration and partnerships between public policy scholars and practitioners, including the institutions involved in teaching, training, and research in public policy. The objective is to advance and strengthen the discipline and the practice of public policy in India. Regarding Center for Public Policy Research, Kochi, we are an independent public policy think tank based out of Kerala. Our engagement in public policy began in 2004 and has initiated open dialogue, policy changes, and institutional transformation in the areas of international relations and security, livelihood, education, urban reform, health, governance, and law. To know more about what we do, please do visit our website, www.cppr.in, and our social media accounts. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants who have logged in today from across the world. We look forward to engaging with you to enrich today's discussion. To put in your questions to the speakers, you can add them in the chat box. You can also watch the live streaming of the panel discussion on our YouTube, and you can also follow the event on Twitter. Keep track of our live tweets on education reforms and CPPR dialogue. Hello, everyone. So I welcome the moderator, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, to the panel discussion. Welcome, ma'am. Nextly, I would like to welcome the other three panelists for the day. Firstly, I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Dr. G. Gopakumar, former Vice-Chancellor of the Central University of Kerala and also advisor to CPPR. Welcome, sir, to the discussion.
Thank you.
Secondly, I would like to welcome Dr. Mausmi Mukherjee, Founding Executive Director, Center for Comparative and Global Education, OP Jindal Global University. Welcome, ma'am, to the discussion. And lastly, I take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Meeta Sengupta, FRSA, who's a writer, keynote speaker, and advisor on building the future of education, leadership, and systems. Fellow Salzburg Global Seminar and Educator. Welcome, ma'am, to the panel discussion.
Good to be here.
Nextly, to set the context of our discussion today, India's higher education landscape has grown tremendously since independence and is the third largest in terms of students, trailing only behind China and the USA. At the same time, the QS World University Rankings 2023 have only 3 Indian institutions below the rank of 200. This is indicative of the need for quality education among Indian higher education institutions. One of the initiatives put forward by the government in this direction is through the National Education Policy of 2020 towards the internationalization of higher education system in India. This is to be carried forward by the operation of top universities in the world in India. In furtherance of the same, a regulatory framework was recently put forward by the UGC titled University Grant Commission, setting up an operation of campuses of foreign higher educational institutions in India, Regulations 2023. In the light of these developments, the panel discussion will look into the various aspects of internationalization of higher education in India. Now, I request Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu to kindly take over the discussion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shilpa, and greetings to one and all who are here on a Thursday evening at 5 o'clock to have a very engaging discussion on a very, what may I say, a very vibrant topic of discussion today, that is on internationalization of higher education with specific focus on the UGC regulations that were brought out recently in the draft form for the setting up and operation of foreign educational institutions in India. To just set the tone before I take it over with the panelists, who are the 3 eminent ones here, Dr. Gopakumar, who was the former Vice-Chancellor of Central University Kerala and is known for a lot of international collaboration and also on internationalization key thoughts. And more interestingly, he's also a psephologist. So he would also have other aspects maybe that might be more interesting for us to know. Maushmiji, who is a part of the OP Jindal and which is taking forward the idea of internationalization and also doing a lot in terms of its own rankings in various areas of, I would say, legal fields and so on. And Meeta Sengupta, whose earlier affiliation with Brookings India, though she doesn't like to be told about that as affiliation, or she rather likes to be known as an independent analyst, and therefore, and has always been a contributor to a lot of thinking that goes on in the field of educational reforms. Not to say the least, the entire team of the CPPR fellows and advisors are here, and a whole host of academicians and educationists from various fields are also logged into this particular discussion. Now, on internationalization of higher education, which the National Education Policy 2020 has been quite bold in trying to say that we need to really add on to the edge of competitiveness in trying to not only work on internationalization at home through faculty, student mobility, academic credit mobility, and institutional mobility, including trying to attract international students by the setting up of an international students office. The latest one is the one that the UGC has brought about in terms of allowing the entry of foreign universities to set up their campuses here, which would obviously be followed up by our other recommendation in the policy, which is of allowing the Indian universities to set up their campuses abroad also, which is what we have mentioned in the National Education Policy 2020. And the only deviations that are there, one, of course, I think most of us over here are aware that this is not the first attempt that we have done to bring foreign institutions in our country. We have had an earlier effort, but that was through a legislative route. It even went to a parliamentary standing committee in 2010, but finally that had never fructified. And now when we had said that even in the NEP, that it should be the legislative route, the UGC in its wisdom has brought it about through the regulatory route. The other deviation that the UGC has said is in terms of saying that instead of the top 100, that they would take the top 500 in the rankings. And in some cases, the second eligibility is that where there are discipline-specific rankings in their own country, an institution can set up their campus. So there are two entry routes that happens for the institutions to set up their campuses here. Their range of programs is across the entire spectrum, from undergraduate to postgraduate to doctoral, across certificates, diplomas, and degrees. The only embargo is on online courses, and that is not being permitted, but a lot of flexibility in terms of the international institutions deciding the admission criteria, the fee criteria, the selection of the faculty have also been put in place in this new norms. So in this context, let me not dwell more on the introductory remarks. Up to 6 or 6.5, we'll have discussion with the panelists. And let me put the first question to the panelists. Let me start with Dr. Gopakumar ji. What is your own take in terms of this particular regulation, both on the positive part as well as on points of concern? You could go for about 3 to 4 minutes, Professor Gopakumar ji.
Yeah, first of all, the internationalization of education policy, of the higher education policy itself is a very challenging one, but definitely holds a lot of potentialities and progress. This is really a challenge to us because during the last few decades, we have progressed so much in multiple levels. But now time has come for us to ensure that both quality and quantity are balanced. Along with that, we should ensure, along with the quality, access and equity. So this is really a big challenge because as of now, once you look at the general policy on internationalization of higher education, which already a few universities have started, not in terms of inviting foreign universities, but in terms of collaboration, we are already into that for a couple of years or decades too. But now we are planning in a bigger way, and therefore the UGC has been requested to initiate with the regulation. And it is exactly here the problem emerges, because you have many programs as far as internationalization education policy is concerned. You have issues like admission, you have problems of credit transfer, you have also issues relating the nature of program that can be offered. Then there can be even a dual degree program. So these varies from one place to another. Even exchange of faculty can also be brought in. So my suggestion is that more flexibility into the regulation will create problems. But at the same time, we cannot be very, very rigid as far as this country is concerned. But broad parameters are to be ensured, because as NEP suggests that first 100 meritorious universities as per the global ranking will be admitted, and based upon their interest too. So that means that we are not going to open up for poor universities or trivial universities or poor quality universities. So we wanted to ensure better universities, and if some of them, if you expect Ivy League to come, it is very good. If you expect some of the best universities from Australia and New Zealand or UK, it's all welcome. But how do we manage this, and what kind of organization? Because the stakeholders are not only students, parents, and teachers, also the government, the private sector, the civil society. So we need certain structured parameters and regulations for this. And since internationalization involves too many things, including credit transfer, exchange of teachers, and also admission process, and regarding the availability of scholarships, so I think there must be proper regulation in this regard. And homogeneity may not be extendable at all the time, but over flexibility can also create issues, because now we know that we have different tiers of education institutions ranging from IITs, IIMs to the ordinary state universities, the private universities. But it's also a factor that most of the time the urban-centered universities have taken a prominent role in all these things, leaving very little for the ordinary universities at the local level. But here the problem is that if they are going to concentrate only in urban cities and not extend to other areas, number one, then regarding how the scholarship can be distributed and which are the agencies that are offering scholarship. In foreign universities, multinational corporations offer scholarships. To what extent this can be taken care of as far as our country is concerned. So there are many issues, and these issues are related to equity, access, quality, affordability. And unlike in Western countries where students are given opportunities for employment and they can also go for work, whether we do have a chance for the industrial development, and that industry is offering small jobs or medium-sized jobs so that the students are in a position to pay the fees. So there are pretty lot of issues that are challenging before us. So I would say that we need certain common parameters, and based upon that parameters, we can have discussion at the civil society level, and limited amount of flexibility can also be offered. Ultimately, the success of this challenging program depends to a very great extent upon our collective leadership and the involvement. Otherwise, many of the problems that we had already inherited might continue in future also. In order to avoid that, we need to ensure that maximum facilities should be given, and at the same time, the state versus the private sector, and along with that, the emergence of a competitor like foreign universities, the things are going to be much more challenging. I support this policy, but on the feeling that ultimately it should offer sufficient service conditions to ensure that students are getting opportunities even from the poor sections. So that's where the scholarship is required. We don't think that affirmative action policy can be extended in foreign universities, but at least poor students should be given opportunities in terms of getting scholarship from several bodies, and that will enable them to get these job opportunities in future also. And this is just an introduction. Thank you. I will wait for other comments and then come.
Thank you, Professor Gopakumar. And I think you flagged some issues in terms of the equity part, which of course has been mentioned in the regulations, though broadly touching upon internationalization on a larger scale. Let me come to Maushmi-ji at the second panelist and ask you the same question on what is your own take on the foreign universities draft regulations, which are likely to be firmed up, and what is your take in terms of the positive part of it, as well as what you think would be pain points in implementing the entry of foreign universities. Moshmiji, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsher. I hope that I am audible to everybody.
Yes, you are. Yes.
I personally really welcome this draft regulation, though it's just a draft, but as I understand, it's a follow-up to the central regulation that came from the International Financial Services Centers Authority for setting up and operations of international branch campuses and offshore campuses, offshore education centers, based on which this universities were invited in this gift city in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. And the UGC regulation, I personally think it's very, very important to create regulations to particularly protect, if you talk about higher education, there are many stakeholders, but for me as a teacher, I always put students first, students' interest. And what we have seen over the past years and the knowledge that we have about international branch campuses outside of India, in other countries, the way international branch campuses have operated and the knowledge base that we have on internationalization of higher education, we have seen particularly in many countries, international branch campuses have been shut down in a very abrupt manner. I don't want to mention specific names of universities, and these are all very high-ranking global universities. Some of them are in the Ivy League, and branch campuses have been abruptly shut down in places like Singapore, in Dubai, and specifically all the more in the middle of the COVID crisis. Okay? Whereas here, if you see, in contrast to these branch campuses, international branch campuses in places like Singapore and Dubai, if you see how our homegrown new Indian universities have managed the COVID crisis, I should say we have managed it much, much better. Once again, I don't want to mention names, but it's open fact. Anybody can search these days and find this information. So so to have a regulatory system, particularly in the 21st century, in this world of uncertainty, and we know that these kind of crises, and as if what the scientists are saying, if we would take that to seriously, setting up of higher educational institution, whether they are homegrown or foreign institutions setting up branch campuses in any country, need to take these things into consideration. Sudden shutdown of campuses and operations, how it is going to really affect the students, the concerned students. And not just students, their faculty members, their staff, there's a whole ecosystem that operates within a particular institution. So I personally welcome the draft regulation, but at the same time, I personally think that a lot of the things need to be further fleshed out. Of course, it's a draft, and also because since this draft regulation has also come up following NEP 2020, which it has created in my own personal conversations with my contacts and colleagues abroad, I have found a lot of issues of uncertainties and confusion in the minds of people in terms of, as all of you know, NEP 2020 talks about HECI, Higher Education Commission of India, as the main regulatory authority, eventually, setting up of HECI. But at the same time, now UGC, this draft regulation has come up. So many people, many stakeholders are a little bit of uncertain, in a little bit uncertainty. Okay, so is this to be how authoritative the UGC draft regulation is going to in the long run if we have HECI instead of UGC? So these are some of my initial comments I just wanted to share, and I'm
Yeah, thank you, Maushmi, for flagging two issues, I think, which the draft regulations also anticipate in terms of branch campuses suddenly closing down and having alternate arrangements for students so that at least their learning trajectory is not put to a grave loss. But of course, you are right that it's not just the students, but an entire ecosystem which has many other stakeholders. And the apprehension that some of the foreign institutions would have, since we are talking about another regulator and whether this regulation is brought out by an existing regulator. But I don't think in normal legal frameworks, you would have a new regulator. It would not be like how political governments function or where we don't have a succession plan where usually if you say extent regulations will all be overturned by a regulator would create absolute chaos in the Indian scenario or any scenario for that matter. So I think that apprehension, I think, may not be something that is really well founded. Is set against this backdrop, let me now come to our independent analyst and to take Prof. Dr. Meeta Sen Gupta's views on the same regulation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shamsud. This has been a fantastic discussion so far, and I think one of the things that the two panelists have already talked about is the uncertainty of positioning these regulations between regulation and flexibility, between the past and the future, in terms of so many variables. Such as student mobility, student certainty. And I'd actually like to widen the context first. In the context of the very idea of internationalization of education. And in the context of where India stands today in the geopolitical space. Internationalization of education has always been a very strong tool of soft power for many nations. And the past 300, 400 years of history have taught us that if we are to even speak in the language of our nation, negotiate WTO terms of trade, anything that needs to be negotiated, literature, stories, art, music, everything, if we need to participate in our own language, we also need to participate in building the academic, theoretical, and consequently the studentship in that language. For example, we know the grand story of the writing workshops of the that started off in the USA, and the consequent flow of ideas from that. And as India begins to evolve its identity as economy, I will say, as it begins to evolve its economy and assert its economic power, not saying whether it's right or wrong. There are many political debates that can emanate from that. We're not going there at all. But the language has to have a solid academic backing. And I think this internationalization exercise needs to be seen in the context of the coming of age of an economy again. And therefore, I think this tendency to caution may be overplaced. If we are trying to be daring as an economy, then we need to also be daring in the knowledge space. That freedom that the branch offices, campuses have not seen in many countries is entirely possible in India. So I completely hold with Professor Gopakumar's regulatory rigor, but academic freedom and regulatory rigor can certainly coexist. And I think that is the space that I'm hoping that we will explore. As far as, and as Professor Shamsu just said, this has not been the first attempt at internationalization. This journey of internationalization started earlier. I think in 2016, there were some studies that were commissioned as well, and there were 2 or 3 years of deep effort that went into it. And this is part of a process. So the second thing I'd like to say is that these regulations, I see this as a part of a process. This draft is a negotiating position that has been put out to foreign universities. So just as the WTO negotiations often take decades and decades, the Doha round is many decades and so on and so forth. This is a part of a much longer conversation with the international academic community, saying here is another way we formulate it. In this one, please note that we want to take care of our students. And that there's so much emphasis in the details over here, not fleshed out. You rightly point that out, Professor. But there is so much attention to students. There's so much attention to, we want it done our way. But there is also a very dramatic concession given in terms of repatriation of fees, which opens up the very question of education as a public good versus a private good. It's a very dramatic concession, a huge concession that's been given in terms of our institutional notion of who we are as universities, by saying you can have any level of fee payment to your professors, but we want your foreign professors to stay here for enough length of time. So there is a lot that needs to be understood in that. And I think I would love to investigate this more as a negotiating position in terms of mobility, in terms of creating labor markets, and in terms of capacity building for academia and the country. I'll pause here.
Thank you, Mitaji. You've opened up new areas for, I think, even the audience to start looking at from their questions point of view. Because actually the internationalization and the foreign universities regulation is an assertion of India's soft power, very rightly so. And at the same time, I think, to be very conservative and not take risks in trying to bring this about. But like Professor Gopakumar has mentioned, issues of equity, and also like Maushmiji has mentioned, taking student interest, keeping that at the uppermost level is definitely a major area that we need to balance very, very sensitively so that we are not putting students at a risk. I'm going to put a couple of questions clubbed together, in which again, I would like all the three panelists, and I'll start with Maushmiji in that. One is, of course, do you envisage with the foreign universities regulation, the student migrations? In fact, it is very interesting to note that in the parliament session in February, the answer given by the Ministry of Education says that the number of students going abroad overseas had jumped up by 68%. That is from 4,44,553 in 2021. That number has gone to 7.5 lakhs in 2022. It's a substantial hike, compared to the fact that this has happened just as we opened up after COVID. And though the apprehensions of COVID still remain. And as far as the number of foreign students studying over here, it's an abysmally low number of just about 48,000 students coming in from some limited countries. So what do you think? Do you think foreign universities coming here would actually stop this kind of student migration to a great extent? Two, whether you think that because of foreign universities setting up campuses, it would be easier for the NEP recommendation of going towards integrated multidisciplinary liberal arts education becoming easy? And three, do you think that employment opportunities would be sort of enhanced because of the foreign universities coming over here? A point that even Professor Gopakumarji was mentioning, because students can finance themselves. So these three aspects, I would like all three of you, and then if time permits, next questions onwards, I'll take it to specific panelists. Let me start with you, Maushmiji, followed by Professor Gopakumar, and then Mitaji.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsher. Once again, very good question. And once again, as a teacher, I want to start with the voices of my own students. Sometimes I ask these questions to my students on campus. I actually teach this semester, I'm teaching a course on international education, soft power, and public diplomacy. So a couple of my students are already planning to, one of them has already gotten admission to go to further higher studies in the US, and a few of them are contemplating. So sometimes I ask questions to my students about these issues. Foreign universities coming to India, would they like to stay back in India, or would they still consider going to a university in US or UK or somewhere else? The answer, quite interestingly, that I have received from many of my really bright students here is that young people, students, those who of course have the privilege to afford international higher education, even then they do look for scholarships, particularly those who go to the US because it's so expensive, their conversion. But what I understand from them is, what they are looking for, it's not just the academic experience, but also the social and cultural experience. To be in the US, to be in Washington, DC, or in New York, or in London, or in somewhere in Sydney or Melbourne, to have that, experience of being in a foreign country, the city, the socio-cultural experience is something young people are really, and even we send a lot of our students for short-term semester abroad, study abroad, and also semester abroad programs at our university. This is something I also find out from my students, those who, in my own one-on-one conversation with the students, that they really, the academic aspect is there, of course, and especially for the short-term programs, they're all the more looking for, the social and cultural exposure more. Those who are going for degree seeking, longer term programs, their academic interest is more in them. But the social and cultural experience and immersion experience is something they really look for, very, especially young people. And that is something I don't think, of course, there will be some effect on the student flow outside of India, but I don't think it's going to totally have a very, radical shift, especially if young people are really looking for physical mobility to another country, another society, to have that, immersion, socio-cultural immersion. Now, in terms of, opening up to the world and allowing, foreign universities to come to India, we know, NEP has set up a very ambitious mandate. Even till now, our cross enrollment ratio is around 27%. So to increase that to 50%, by 2030, 2035. It's a really ambitious project. We need a lot more higher education. Even though we are the second largest higher education system in the world now, we need a lot more higher education institutions. So sometimes when I speak with colleagues here in India and in some quarters, I find there is a sort of defensive kind of pushback against, this openness. Not everybody is welcoming this kind of openness. But I don't think there is reason to be overtly concerned about that, because the demand is so much more than the supply of higher education right now. But at the same time, I personally also agree with Professor Gopakumar, the main concern he raised right at the very beginning with regards to the equity issue. We know the globally mobile students from India who are globally mobile, the percentage is really very small, right? The very small privileged group of globally mobile students, if we take into consideration the larger body of students that we have within India. And in order to provide access to higher education to that larger body of students, in what way the entry of higher education, foreign higher educational institution can really help, that is really something we need to think through very seriously, frankly speaking, because from my own conversation with my students, the understanding that I have, I can't give you specific empirical data or evidence about it, but this is personal understanding I have gained through my conversation with my students here at Jindal. Those who have that means and resources to be globally mobile, they will, opt for to be globally mobile, even if foreign university is set up their branch campuses.
I'll take it over to Professor Gopakumar ji to focus on the other
Yeah.
two areas also of liberal arts education and employment, which Maushmi ji has focused more on the likelihood of students continuing to go abroad because of the other experiences that they enjoy. Professor Gopakumar.
Yeah, interestingly, I start with a small example of the contemporary Kerala situation, where the middle class population in huge numbers are encouraging students to migrate for undergraduate education. It may be a tragedy of Kerala's economy and job opportunities. That's another point. But in general, the question raised has some important relevance in the sense that we are not going to open up the floodgates of international universities in a big manner. As the NEP suggested, that you should bring it in a phased manner to ensure that how this internationalization of foreign universities ensure a new space for our students. So my gut feeling is that initially there won't be much decline in terms of student mobility and migration, mainly because these students migrate not only for getting quality education, but also to ensure their future, particularly their employment prospects. And this aspect has to be taken into consideration. And therefore, I think this is a lesson for us. And that brings to your final third question, again related to the same point. So once we improvise our industrialized culture and industrialization process in a phenomenal manner, whether it is manufacturing or software or service sector, whatever it may be, provided we open up that kind of market situation where students are positioned in such a way that they'll get very good jobs provided with the value added product called the foreign university degree, definitely there will be a fall in the mobility of the students to foreign countries. So my point is, my response is that there won't be an immediate decline in the number, but some of them will definitely prefer to stay back in India because there is a domestic space for university they may attract, but that is not going to change the present data that you have given. Nearly 7.5 lakh students migrated last year. So I don't think there will be a phenomenal decline, but there will be a small decline. But it depends upon in future if the student feel that, well, we do have foreign universities in our own country and we get jobs in our own country. So why should we go? That will take time. That process will take time. So we have to wait until that kind of industrialization has come. See, as we know very well that we moved from agriculture economy, we're now driving more towards service sector, partially towards industrialization. And thanks to the digital development, employment opportunities are multiplying in every level. So I think we can be positive on the potentialities, but I don't find an immediate impact on that. And probably your second question was about its impact on national institutions. Am I right? Am I right?
No, not on the national institute. I wanted to know whether the allowing the foreign universities here would be an encouragement to liberal arts and multidisciplinary education. On the national institutions, we'll take it up separately, but whether it would promote and encourage what NEP wanted of promoting interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, integrated liberal arts education.
Yeah, certainly. I think it will encourage because as we have tasted, all of us must have seen foreign universities in our lifetime. And we have seen the nature of interdisciplinarity and the nature in which they have promoted liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. So I don't think it will make much of a difference. There is a fear that STEM, science, technology, engineering, medicine will overtake. I don't think so. There will be a qualitative shift in every sector, and that will definitely bring impact upon liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. So that I'm not very much concerned or I'm not upset by the kind of foreign universities going to destroy our liberal arts and social sciences, because if we can ensure, if we can understand and comprehend the interdisciplinarity nature, the multiple methodology they are using, and at the same time, the new trends as far as the pedagogy is concerned, certainly liberal arts and other science and humanities will have their own potentiality. So it is not going to upset altogether. And the feeling that only science, technology, education, medicine, etc., engineering and medicine will progress. I think that won't work because some of the best universities I have seen, including IIT, MIT, and other kinds of international technological institutes at the global level, have given sufficient space for liberal arts and humanities. So I think we can encourage that and ensure that languages, multidisciplinary studies can also be brought in. So I'm not very much upset, or I'm not very much concerned that this will bring a paradigm shift against liberal arts. That's my feeling. Thank you.
Neetaji, as I move to you, I just want to flag one more dimension. The regulations do not allow for online education. And adding to the space that is already given by the panelists, when you address, please try and touch upon whether that has been a good move in this regulation, as along with what we are talking, because I think both the panelists are saying they don't see an immediate decline in the student migrations. Whether you endorse that view, and what do you say about whether we promote multidisciplinarity, why online education not being allowed is good or bad, and whether this coming in of foreign universities will give an impetus to different kinds of employment opportunities because of new kind of courses that these foreign universities might bring in our domestic space.
Absolutely. One of the things I think we must about India as a student market is that we are ultimately a very pragmatic set of decision makers. So when we our students make choices to go abroad, that choice is certainly influenced by the economics of the decision. And there are two parts of the economics of the decision. One is the affordability. So the people who could afford to go anyway, they will certainly go out for their experience, for the social and cultural experience, but also for the new pedagogies that they will experience. And by inviting international institutions into our country, we are saying, can we provide that accessibility to those who cannot afford the economics of that international experience abroad? Can we also invite this pedagogy of trust that exists in, which is very different from the pedagogy of mistrust, the examination culture that we've had so far in India. The pedagogies over there are about your personal opinion. A debate is about putting your personal opinion above that of our quotation culture in India. You know, very, very different pedagogies. So the economics of it come in about at that entry point, and then they come at the point of employment. And that is where our STEM culture tends to dominate in India. We have seen these wonderful new universities represented by a fantastic professor here as well, who have brought in liberal arts, who have brought in public policy, these are tradition and law, of course, in different ways and implications and applications of it. But these have not traditionally been seen as hardcore as engineering in terms of your economic potential going forward. And that is the gamble we are taking. That is the gamble in a way. We're saying that, are we able to, and I'm going to paraphrase Professor Gopakumar here in saying that if we are able to bring rigor in the methodologies of teaching, assessing, and progressing these liberal arts, and that in a way becomes the Indian way of international education. If we are about to say, for example, in the social sciences, if there is a very strong mathematical, empirical based methodology to understanding television viewing of women, you will see this multidisciplinarity bring in a level of rigor that brings assurance to the students, saying, at least I know statistics really well. At least I understand empiricism really well. Even the anthropology that makes me a content creator and a YouTuber, or the computer science and the AI that I have learned that makes me a fantastic best-selling songwriter or an NFT producer in the world. At least that will provide an income for me going forward. So the opportunity here is the integration of multidisciplinarity and the integration of rigorous STEM methodology in the liberal arts space. So not necessarily the conventional liberal arts space. Now can this be done without online education? Is my question. I mean, I certainly am an evangelist for certain pedagogies. I am an evangelist for the case study methodology, for example, you know that well. I am also an evangelist for hybrid versions of the future of higher education. And hybrid in this internationalization, in fact, saying if you have a branch campus, or you already have your course split into 2 or 3 different international locations, as we have seen. For example, INSEAD was one of the first to do it for their MBA program. And this was over a decade ago. That already is hybridization. But if we are able to bring in a very large element of hybridization into this new mix, we will be able to bring in that level of rigor. Now, if we get trapped in saying this is online versus this is not online, I think we will be doing our students a disservice. I certainly acknowledge that the fear of online teaching becoming a commercial conduit into simply sending money to universities, private universities abroad that are not about student learning is a danger. We have to watch out for it. So again, this is about fleshing out the regulations with care and with good quality design so that there is a purpose to that online element, and it is no more than an element of the overall structure that you have designed. We will not be able to get all those wonderful specialists in to the country to stay for 3 to 4 years as the current regulations request. But we will certainly be able to bring them on in elements over here. So I think if we are very clear that the economics of both entry and exit of our students are taken care of, and during the studentship, their portfolio of trust, their portfolio of pedagogies, their portfolio of experiences is enhanced. With these elements into the design of international universities, I think we have a case for lowering the growth of, I will not say we will not have more people going abroad, but we can actually ensure that 2 things happen. One, so many people don't desperately want to go abroad, but more importantly, and if you can give me 1 minute more, I would like to say we can bring in people into the students into the country. But students are not going to come into the country for a different version of liberal arts education. They're not going to come in for another engineering or another MBA into this country. I think that will have to become some sort of a national mission. For example, health in India, healthcare in India has the potential to become a massive education cum delivery hub, which has nothing to do with the UGC. That is a completely different sector. So I will not belabor that point, but if we want to bring people in, then we have to have some sort of a national mission for a sector for that to happen.
Okay, got your point, Mitaji. I think it's very well said that we're moving towards hybridization. In fact, COVID has taught us that we need to move towards that. And therefore, it seems very myopic on a certain side that to say that online will not be allowed, because online is a part of the teaching pedagogy that we are now using, as whether you call it supplementary or complementary or hybridization or, many words that we may have used. So I think we must actually start wondering whether the flushed out regulations based on the feedback will try to have an accommodative space for that. At the same time, it's significant to note that can we actually, I do remember during the 12th plan exercise, when we said that India could become an education hub for some countries where their students could come in over here, the point that Mitaji is right now mentioning, that if we have a very different learning experience and a very different kind of an exposure, just as Maushmi was saying that people go out for a different experience that they enjoy, the same would be true for some of the students from various countries, maybe the Middle East and Africa, Latin America and others, where they would be attracted to courses over here because the globe is so vast. And I'm sure there would be enough opportunities for some other countries to start coming over here because of these international branch campuses, as much as we are seeing in Singapore and Dubai and so on, where our NRIs and our expats are actually sending their children to those campuses. Now, let me come to the last set of 2 questions, which I'm again clubbing up because we have just about 15 minutes before the audience can come in. One is that how do you view, and I here start with Mitaji first, go to Gopakumar and Maushmi ji last, that how do you think that competitiveness is not a bad word? I've always believed that a win-win situation, provided you follow the rules of the game and you provide a level playing field. Now, would you see the opening up of foreign universities coming here as a threat to our institutions, particularly a threat to private universities. Maushmiji is already here from OP Jindal, and whether that is seen as a threat, and how do you see regulatory and legal challenges to this whole exercise of trying to allow foreign universities to open up their campuses here? Mitaji, first you, followed by Gopakumar and Maushmiji.
I think it's undeniable that it will be seen as a threat. There will be a fear. Whether it really is a threat or not, obviously depends upon the details of the regulations as they come out. But one thing is fairly clear, that those young professors, the bright sparks who find themselves in junior positions in many and some government universities we know are truly excellent, but there are many, many pockets that are rather gray and dark. They will certainly see an opportunity to branch out into these new campuses of international universities. So yes, there is a potential of both the smarter students and the smarter younger faculty to move to these new universities, knowing that they will be giving up two things. One, they will be giving up the very concept of the very secure concept of tenure as happens in Indian universities. I mean, tenure exists everywhere in the world. But again, the Michigan example, etc., has taught us that even tenure can be revoked in international universities. And two, as Maushmiji talked about, branch campuses closing down. What happens to you as faculty if they suddenly closes down and you haven't built enough social capital or relationship or professional capital to be invited to that campus? So yes, there is a risk as much as in any other job. So do you want to become any other job, or do you want to go to the cozy cocoon of your arena and have a standard pathway? Those are choices that become available. And I think that actually makes it more exciting, because as you rightly said, this competition should exist, because if as a traditional university you are afraid of this thing happening, then do something about it, right? That sounds logical. It sounds logical. We know pragmatically that it's a big ask. So even if this fear, so sure, the fear will exist. Some very small amount of transfer will exist at the junior level. Structurally, I don't think it changes anything for a long, long time, because and also in a regulatory manner, I think regulatory closure of gates is always a bad idea, because wherever you have new regulatory gates, you have desperate gatekeeping, then you have all sorts of compensatory laws. It just creates it's a ridiculous mess for another 5 to 7 years to unravel. And then we'll be waiting for the next new education policy to unravel the mess of gatekeeping that is created right now. So one of the things we should be very cautious of at this stage is not to create that kind of a regulatory mess, and to be very, very light-handed in any gatekeeping, any regulatory inputs at this stage. I have so much more to say on this that I think I should actually let the others speak. But you opened up the floodgates of a very, very important topic. I don't think we should be living in fear of this transfer.
Okay. Professor Gopakumar.
Yeah. I was thinking that as a social scientist, my own feedback on this issue is that initially there will be a lot of concerns and challenges. As somebody who had seen the worst colleges and universities in this country and the best in this country, there will be a high level of unevenness, which would call for immediate challenges. No doubt about that. But this is not to shy away from competition. That is the second part. So my first argument is that on the one side, if you are once we open up the floodgates of internationalization, on the other, the state's responsibility to ensure adequate funding, proper training, capacity building, and other kinds of content development as far as curriculum is concerned. So all these kinds of progress should come to the state institutions at the national level, so that we will have competitions from the government, from the private, as well as from the foreign. We should lead to such a situation, and for which I think we need not suffer from any kind of complex. Although we know very well, and some questions have already come from the chat box on the same point as to how much we have prepared for 2047. So my argument is that adequate funding and no compromise, 6% of the GDP must be earmarked for education, and the money must come for the state, including the NRF and other kinds of assurance has been given. Without money and without proper training, guidance, and quality, state and the private sector won't be able to come up and compete with the foreign universities. So this is a level of competition. And once we enter and the kind of infrastructural support comes to the universities and colleges, definitely the teachers will be motivated, students will be motivated, and of course, there will be some who will be hesitating in the initial space, but ultimately, we will all join the mainstream. I believe strongly that Indian genes are really good to compete anywhere in the world, provided we have the proper ecosystem, the environment, and the kind of background that we can prepare. We didn't.
I think we've lost Professor Gopakumar. He can join in. Maybe Maushmiji, you can start with your own take on this aspect of whether national institutions are put to a threat, which most of you would say yes, I'm sure. But also, do you see any challenges, particularly legal challenges coming up this week?
Sure, sure. You know, I totally agree with my other panelists, Dr. Gopakumar and Professor Gupta, what they have been saying, frankly speaking. But at the same time, I just wanted to share some thoughts from the perspective of foreign institutions, those who might like to come to India, right? Okay, so if you look at the literature and if you look at the history of also foreign branch campuses in other parts of the world, in places like the Far East and also in the Middle East, you can see that significant incentives were given by domestic governments in those countries, right? For these foreign universities to come and set up their campuses. Professor Gopakumar just talked about 6% of GDP, which is the globally, according to global consensus, should be the basic common, global requirement in terms of GDP investment, which we have still not been able to attain. Also, if you talk about competition, I totally agree with Gopakumar. All our domestic universities, higher education institutions can very well compete. There is no, and I don't think they're going to shy back to compete, provided they have, the playing field should be level enough, right? And in order to level that playing field, once again, with significant support and investment from the part of the government would be very, very important. Not just to provide incentive for the foreign institutions to come and set up branch campuses here, but also to empower the domestic institutions to compete with these foreign branch campuses.
Okay, Maushmi, I see Professor Gopakumar has joined again. So have you done with your take? Then I'll go back to Professor Gopakumar. He was sort of having a technical problem. Thank you, Maushmi.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Professor Gopakumar, you can unmute yourself, please.
I think it's audible now. Yeah.
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
I was about to argue that ultimately it will lead in this country to a very competitive level. Although we suffer so much from inequity and also from differences of many kinds, ultimately, if the state support comes to the national institutions and state universities on proper manner, and on the other private sector is already there with their own funding and competition, then the foreign universities will also provide. So there is a 3 levels of competition will come, and that would provide opportunities for the teachers also, and enough opportunities for the students to think and decide where they should go. So ultimately, I was referring that some questions have already come in the chat box in the same sense. So are we prepared for this kind of funding and also proper training and capacity building? So the responsibility for the state and the central government being in a concurrent list, I think it multiplies. And this arrival of international universities is providing both a challenge and opportunity. I feel that we can lead to the positive direction, but initially there will be some kind of problem. But if the state doesn't withdraw from supporting the government, from the universities and education, certainly other problems we can address it and provide it. As Vice-Chancellor, I have seen our own best scientists and engineers and technocrats migrate to foreign countries, partly because we don't have sufficient laboratories, sufficient industries. So if we can ensure those things in our country, what's the problem? So this is an opportunity. And that is where I said that 6% GDP has to come. I was told that as of now, hardly 3% has not been distributed. Then how can this be achieved? So once you write a good policy, we should ensure that whatever assured in the policy must be properly implemented. And that is where the responsibility lies with the administration, also with the political executive. Thank you.
So I think the range of questions that I really wanted the panelists to address have been almost covered in this 1 hour that we talked. And there was one question which Professor Gopakumar has already answered from Abhilash.
Yeah,
if I see up to 2047.
Yeah.
But I think we have other questions that are also there in the chat box. So let me take that up. And after that, I'd still like the panelists to have their own last word on this topic. So Akansha has asked that, do you think that if the international universities start setting up in India, the lecturers and professors will also be imported from, I like the word imported, from respected countries, or will the faculty be majority Indians? I think it came out partially because the impact on professors hasn't even been thought about. It could potentially change in that either direction. Before I pass it on to Meeta, who had already said that if we are able to come out of the comfy zone of our pensions that we get, that is there for our lifelong pensions that we get, I think this competition would really force us to come out of our comfort zones to look for better opportunities. Meeta ji, your take on it.
So this is something that we've experienced many times before. For example, at the time of setting up of the ISB, which was supposed to be a hub for international professors for Indian students. That was the original idea. I happened to be in the room where these ideas were being developed at the India Center at London Business School at that time, decades ago. And we asked professors to come in and they would say, okay, where will our children study? Will our children get the kind of clean air and the kind of playgrounds and the league tables? Where will our wives work? Because at that time, this was 30 years ago, things are so much better now. But even now, will our wives get intellectual opportunities? Will we get the kind of rich research consultancy opportunities that we get abroad? Do we have the kind of, you referred to MIT. MIT professors, almost all of them have invested in offshoot companies, startups of their own students, highly technical startups. Do we get those opportunities? 2 years, 3 years down the line, will regulatory overload be more, will that be taking up more of our time than actually building institution building? And those are the kinds of questions that professors and faculty are actually asking. Sonipat, as you know, ma'am, has this amazing ecosystem that you're trying to create. Ahmedabad, again, had a wonderful ecosystem in the past of institutional interaction over there. Now, are we able to create those ecosystems of learning, progress, and growth for our faculty so that they want to stay on? Historically, we have seen that all the wonderful faculty who have come on either as professors or as vice-chancellors or as directors of IIMs, etc., have typically gone back in 3 to 4 years. That is as much as they're able to manage over here. So we will also need to create supportive ecosystems to hold international faculty in India. International faculty in India, by the way, is also a very interesting topic for schools that we are not approaching and not thinking of all the things that we are not thinking of over here. So that is one, but I think the other aspect is growing up our own faculty in global academic traditions. And we have an opportunity for that, even in the 3 to 4 years that we manage to get international faculty. Maybe we don't want them for longer than that. And that's something for us to decide.
If any other panelists would like to come in, but I would really like to say that the ministry schemes of Gyan has already sparked off a whole lot of international faculty who come in for a secondment, but of course limited to maybe a semester. And so also the other opportunities that come in through dual degrees and joint and twinning programs also provide for opportunities for faculty mobility. But here is one in which their stay over here is longer. And this concern comes in even when central universities in India opened up campuses in Koraput and so many other places. Where do our children study? Where do our spouses get jobs is a major concern, which affects or, helps us to make decisions or makes that whole process. On this particular question, would Professor Gopakumar or Maushmi want to add something, or do I go to the next question?
Yeah. So I think that we need not have to be afraid of the kind of competition that is likely to come, because the new generation of teachers, I'm sure they have more confidence than us probably. And moreover, having served in NAC for several years and have seen the kind of teaching community, the kind of atmosphere and the ecosystem in some of the places, the way the differences in salaries, the wage package, the kind of exploitation that is being given to the teachers. So ultimately, money matters, and also the environment matters, and the ecosystem matters. Good teachers can be brought in, provided they are given paid properly by the private sector as well. And even otherwise, the kind of library support, the digital support, the laboratory support. Once you develop the altogether called ecosystem, I think things can improve. So I have seen college teachers being paid less than 12,000 rupees in some of the visits. So they have silently told us this because of the kind of fear that they have with the management. So my point is that the investment should come in such a way, whomsoever comes to education sector should ensure quality teaching should be make available. And also that provided the teachers are given the right kind of exposure, training, seminar participation, other facilities, certainly their quality will improve. So teachers will not improve quality by their own unless they are given opportunities. And it is a responsibility of the government to ensure maximum opportunities, provide teacher flexibility, and even they can be invited for foreign programs, short-term programs. And once they come back, their morale will be high and the kind of exposure they will change. Because this is a highly interconnected world. India cannot keep aloof of that. If our market situation has changed so much in such a short span of time, I am sure that education sector can also improve. And interconnectedness, thanks to the collaboration availability and the potentiality exists, I'm sure the teachers will improve their quality. But my fundamental point is that adequate funding and the kind of support on proper timing is very, very important. Other things will follow. Thank you.
Once again, I totally agree with what Professor Gopakumar has just said. And, I personally am affiliated with a university which has set up a really wonderful example. Over the past only 13 years, we have around 10% of our faculty from over 100 countries around the world. And the way the university, despite not a very supportive visa and immigration process and all these things, the way our HR has handled and managed to retain all these faculty, and these are all full-time faculty. They are not like here for a semester or two. They're here full-time, they're living here with their spouse and children. And if you talk about also the NEP agenda of internationalization at home, I think very important, how many students can really afford to go for study abroad, even for a short-term program. Okay, so having international faculty on campus and having all the students, those who cannot even, specifically those to large majority of students who can't afford to go for study abroad, helps them also gain global experience in that sense through their own, not just academically learn from international faculty, but also get social and cultural exposure through their interaction with international faculty. So I think it's very, very important to have this openness. And in terms of, of the visa regulations and all these things, lot more needs to be done to really facilitate, because I know I interact with my international colleagues here and the difficulties many of them experience with visa renewals and all kinds of issues. So I think it would, the UGC draft regulation is welcome, but it needs to be supported with a lot of other, enabling factors that needs to happen in order for it to really work out.
Okay, thank you, Maushmiji. And I think the next question is trying to point out a kind of a contradiction that as a higher education, it comes from Mary Philip. As a higher education institution, what according to you is our position, given the fact that we are aiming for internationalization on the one hand and talking about teaching in Indian languages as directed by the UGC lately? Will this not discourage international students or weaken the chances of our own students? So it seems to be that we are wondering whether there is a contradiction. As a moderator, let me not give my take on that. Let me pose that. Let me pose that question to Professor Gopakumar. Do you think internationalization, on one hand, goes diametrically opposite to the directions that the NEP itself said of promoting Indian languages, and the UGC trying to say that we will? As we said that we will offer higher education in regional languages, and we are doing it full steam. So do you see this as a contradiction, or do you think that these two can easily survive together and enrich rather than becoming a limiting?
It is less a contradiction and more a chance for living together, in the sense that this problem is more at the school level. That is why the national education policy suggested that mother tongue is very important for basic education, and promoting language at the local level has already been approved. Thankfully, we have solved that question. Otherwise, as you had expected, the old stories of language issue in 1960s and other kinds of problems, ultimately, school education is not with any language problem, because the government is not insisting for either Hindi or English to be brought in at the school level. So that problem is by and large solved. And at the college education, there are a little level of issues and concerns are there, because at the global level, English has become very, very important. At the same time, many North Indian universities continue their education, even higher education, with local national language, Hindi or other things. So this kind of language issue, it can coexist with the kind of internationalization, because we have, why I'm saying it is less a contradiction is that we have already produced one of the strongest middle class in this world with English speaking ability. So provided that this kind of progress will happen, and with next to China having a large middle class, Chinese have learned this very fastly than us, and they have brought in English education very quickly. For us, this problem will not be there in the long run, because we are already a multilingual country. And further, English is very much there as the official, one of the official languages. So this will coexist, and comparing these two, internationalism, higher education, and language issue as one and the same, I think it is not correct, because ultimately the market, the kind of challenges, the kind of internationalization concerns, when all these things come, definitely I think our ability will improve further. We are not a small country like Singapore or Japan or New Zealand or South Korea or Taiwan. We are such a huge country, so we have to balance with multiple languages. There is no other way. At the same time, the importance of internationalization, and particularly where English education is important, ultimately will prevail. And thanks to the growth of, definitely the growth of middle class, and look at the kind of cell phones we have. People are operating. They don't have any language issue. So technology has no problem. There is no barrier. So I think education will also take in. So this saying that these two are one and the same, I think it is not true. And therefore, even if there are certain levels of equity and other kinds of concerns and some contradictions, I think we can manage and live together successfully.
Since we have a shortage of time and there are a couple of questions I want them to be covered. One, what Mita had already raised, and that is being raised by Maria Francis. The draft rule is not very clear about repatriation of any gains by the foreign universities. In fact, it is quite clear. In a country that sees education as a public good, how far does internationalization and profiteering idea be accepted? So Meetaji, I'll put that question to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This draft regulation does allow for repatriation of funds and profits. And I think, again, we will have to wait to see if there are any sub-regulations or any constraints that are implemented in this. Or I'm sure it'll be guided by the general EXIM kind of rules and history that we have had in the country. There's enough experience to guide that. There has been widespread debate about the dangers of this kind of repatriation, about the dangers, especially since up to rank 500 and then subject-based ranks have been allowed. So the kind of universities who can possibly sneak in just for a pure profit motive and just create a money-making channel and exploit our students. So there is that kind of a danger. There is, of course, the wider debate of then what happens to the very notion and identity of universities that completely subscribe to education as a public good, which it is, and must remain so, because all higher education ultimately is for national, international, much more importantly for local civic good as well, not just global national, but even in at your local government level, at your local gather around the tree, around the village level. Education totally improves the quality of life. So you cannot make it a money-making institution channel. At the same time, we are not talking about the mainstream of education here. We are talking about a small sliver of extra education that provides a certain different outlook to the mainstream of education. So I think we don't need to be afraid at this stage of this at all. But as in every other regulatory ecosystem, and India has a very strong regulatory ecosystem, no fly-by-night operator should be allowed to operate. That is
very well said, Meetaji. I think the fly-by-night operators is an area we need to be cautioned about, and that's where the opening up to the 500 itself seems to set off a certain degree of alarm bells, and the two eligibility criteria where institutions having discipline-specific rankings in their own countries, which is a bit dicey in terms of really assessing the quality of the foreign institution coming in. Before I go on to a question, there are two comments that I would just like to read. One is from A.K. Sharda, which is a comment and not a question. Need to strengthen our own higher education institutions, which is what we all are saying, by supporting in academics, infrastructure, etc. By opening up the country, in this country, we shall be killing our own institutions in the name of importing quality. India is capable enough to improve its quality and must not look for short circuit. This area will face the same fate as other areas are facing due to Amazon's entry. So that was a comment from A.K. Sharda. It's well noted. I think it came out in our own discourse as we went along. And Abhilash, who had posed a question about the 2047 preparedness, has also said a comment. We are a legacy provider of education through Nalanda and Takshashila, among others. What we need is the political and intellectual leadership to repotentialize education. So both these comments in their own merits seem to be okay. I'll just take a question from Karthivel, and I'll ask that question to Maushmi, though it seems to be one of an intricacy. Let me just read it out to you. If at all you don't have an answer, please feel free to pass it. Is it possible for a foreign university to set up its campus inside an Indian university campus to offer a joint program here? Maushmi ji, if you would like to comment on that.
But international, what you are saying, and as I understand, there has been a few. It's not international universities setting up their campus inside a foreign university, but there are a few universities, say, for example, Cornell University has set up some global centers. Okay, one of Cornell University's global center is our university, located here at Upijindal, even the neighboring Ashoka University. So there are some universities, particularly US-based universities, they have set up global centers. Okay. And through these global centers, what they are doing is they are facilitating different kinds of, as Dr. Shamshu mentioned, joint degree, dual degree, twinning programs. So internationalization of higher education is not just about foreign universities coming and setting up branch campuses here, but also foreign universities collaborating, like Deakin University in Australia actually had taken lead in setting up many of these programs. Let's say Terry University here in Delhi, IIT Mumbai, and various other institutions, whereby a dual degree, joint degree programs, training programs are offered so that students get the benefit of learning, getting an international exposure, or also getting, initially, of course, dual degrees were getting promoted globally, but because of the different kind of course structure and program structure in different countries and different higher education system, joint degrees increasingly are becoming more and more popular, whereby the students are the faculty members from both universities or departments from both universities coming together to create a program which is jointly administered by these institutions. So these kind of programs are already running. Okay, it's not foreign universities physically opening campus, but they're literally setting up global centers within universities abroad to deliver these kind of dual degree, joint degree, and training programs.
Yeah, I think Maushmiji, that was very well clarified. Of course, a couple of comments are all, complimentary ones, saying that it's a very good discussion happening. But let me take up one last question before I go to your last one-liner and then passing it on to Shilpa. This is to Professor Gopakumar. When self-financing colleges started in Kerala from the 2000, one of the ideas was that the brain drain would stop to an extent that the students would have more seats available for higher education within Kerala. However, recent research has shown in the case of technical education is what he means, the pass percentage in self-financing colleges is less than 50%. So what would be the checks that the government is thinking of stopping a similar thing from happening with international universities? His apprehension seems to be that international universities, the pass percentage would also be as abysmally low as 50%. Any take on that, Professor Gopakumar?
Yeah. I read that question. Very interesting question. Self-financing colleges, I have already mentioned earlier, that's some of the private institutions and self-financing institutions across the country pay the teachers on a very, very lower basis. Infrastructure is hopeless. And if you are going to accept international universities in that way, that will be the doom for India's education. I don't think we will do that. The NEP has already mentioned we will accept the first 100 universities to begin with. So it will be with cautious optimism we have to go ahead. So let us ensure that only quality universities come to this country and they open up branches. And there must be some kind of regulation, some kind of a supervision to see that those coming to our country are really good to the extent that they are competitive and in the sense they are in a position to contribute much. So we don't need the hopeless universities at the global level to come and destroy our own education system. So we need to ensure that some quality check must be there and there has to be a regulatory mechanism to control that. The NEP has already cautioned the first 100. That itself is very clear. Under the global ranking, the first 100 has to be invited first. Let us see. Let us see if that sufficient universities doesn't come, not even 10 comes, we have to open up for the next 100. Let us see. And this has to be in a phased manner. And I fully agree with the sentiment that has been made, how our self-financing institutions collapsed with the poor education, training, and we need not accept and we need not have to appreciate international universities in that level. So there has to be some check and only qualitative universities need to join our country because we want good delivery of quality education. At the same time, they should also provide us high areas of wisdom in a competitive manner also. So this criticism or this concern is very well taken, and we will not open talking shops or educational institutions in a trivial manner. With seriousness, we accept international universities, not just because they have money. That should not be our policy.
Yeah,
Thank
we stop with the questions because of the paucity of time, but let me once again re-emphasize, Professor Gopakumarji, though the NEP talked about the top 100, the UGC draft regulation has said up to 500. And I don't know whether in the final take, they may revise the figure or they stick to their 500. But before I pass it on to Shilpa for her final winding up, let me thank all the panelists. And before I pass it on, I want a one-liner, just a one-liner from each one of you on what you think about the opening up of the campuses, which is already said. But my own take is that this discussion has really opened up our thoughts onto the kind of caution, at the same time where the competition should be leveraged, at the same time create an enabling ecosystem for all to survive, which is what India is, has always been in terms of being all embracing. And therefore, I think that spirit would help us to have internationalization in a real sense. Your own take, Meeta ji first, Maushmi ji, and then Professor Gopakumar, and over to you, Shilpa. And thanking you all panelists and the entire audience for being very, very patient and listening to this conversation and enriching it in a certain sense with your comments.
Thank you. So crisp one-liner, but a long one. I think we should consider this a long game where international universities are seen as part of the portfolio of higher education, which should be assessed on the keyword mobility, where it is mobility of knowledge, mobility of students, mobility of income standards, etc. Long game, portfolio mobility. Thank you.
Professor Gopakumar.
Yeah, I fully agree with whatever you have said, Dr. Shakila, and also Meeta Sen Gupta. We need more professional institutions to be professional and therefore to become more qualitative. I think we can go a long way. And rightly said, it's a lengthy process, but let us be optimistic that we can achieve the goal. Thank you.
Maushmi ji.
I also totally agree with both my co-panelists, but here I would really like to recall India's national poet Kaviguru Rabindranath Tagore, what he said over a century ago. It's a long quote, but I don't want to quote the entire quote, but I'm sure all of you would recall Tagore's philosophy and vision of education. In fact, in one of his writings, he even talked about opening up branch campuses of his own Vishwabharati in other parts of the world. And he envisioned his own university, Vishwabharati, as a home for people from around the world. To come together, teachers, students, poets, philosophers, researchers. And this is how particularly all the more what is more needed in the 21st century. And universities are places for people to come together. And the more we have exchange of ideas and the more diverse group of people we have within a university, there is greater cross-pollination of ideas, right? All the, research universities around the world, and even great literature, great work of art, great research, it all happens through cross-pollination of ideas. And we have that history within this country, even if we don't go far back to, talking about Nalanda and Takshashila, even in modern India, we have the example of Rabindranath Tagore and his Vishwabharati. So with that, I would, like to end what I have to say is, for me personally, I'm a champion for internationalization of higher education, not just in India, in other parts of the world, but at the same time, we need to be cautious. We need to be cautious about the fact that, the first thing that Professor Gopakumar raised is we need to not discount the fact that large numbers of our students still don't have access. So equity first is something I should say. Equity first and equity last would be my, one-liner if I would.
Okay.
Ask him to say.
So let 100 flowers bloom, and we end with that. And I'm happy you brought up Tagore. So I think you've touched a very nice cultural chord in all of us. And let me hand it over to Shilpa. Thank you once again to the panelists. And let me also thank my own host institution, CPPR, of which Professor Gopakumar and myself are a part of. and to Dr. Dhanuraj and others who are there. Nita Sengupta, thank you very much. Maushmi ji, thank you very much. Dr. Gopakumar, thank you very much. And the entire audience who's sitting here are esteemed in their own capacities, and thank you very much for being there. Shilpa, over to you for the winding up remarks.
Thank you, ma'am. As we near the end of this discussion, I would also like to thank all the panelists and the moderator for such an engaging discussion. The panelists have given us insights and views on higher education landscape of India and the scope of internationalization and the effect of internationalization on various stakeholders, including students and faculties, the various aspects that need to be considered to ensure the quality and competition and adequate regulation of these institutions. So thanking you all once again. Let me also take this opportunity to thank all the participants for actively participating in the discussion with their questions, and also the organizing team at CPPR, especially the communication team, for the smooth conduct of the discussion. With this, I would like to formally close today's event. Please do share your views on the panel discussion with the hashtag #EducationReforms and hashtag CPPR Dialogue. Good evening and goodbye. Thanking you all once again.
Thank you all and namaskar. Stay safe.